Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada and the assembled devotees. Welcome to the Faces of Grief seminar. I'm Madhurya Leela Devi Dasi and will be your host this morning. We hope to give you a deeper understanding of what grief is under the expert guidance of our panel so that it can be easily recognized in a person's life. You'll be introduced to appropriate and inappropriate responses to someone who's grieving, and also some things that the grieving person can do for themselves. We will link you up with some resources and then open up the floor for questions and answers through the Zoom link provided on the flyer. To ask a question or make a comment, you may raise your hand, type in the chat throughout the seminar, don't wait till the end, or for an anonymous question directed to Amrita Kali. She will read it without identifying you. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to welcome our guest speakers, Janaki Devi Dasi and Kamala Radha Devi Dasi. A pleasure to have you. Janaki joined the St. Louis Temple in 1981. She has been engaged in many services over the years, including book distribution, teaching Sunday school, child protection team member, and board member of the North American Child Protection Office. She has a master's degree in social work and is a licensed clinical social worker and clinical addiction specialist. She specializes in trauma work, and she is also certified in the right use of power. Janaki has been involved with Vaishnava CARE since 2014 and was trained through the Duke Hospice to facilitate grief support groups. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Krishna.
Kamala Radha is a member of the Vaishnava CARE team. She has assisted Sangeeta and Vaishnava CARE in training seminars. She is a death doula and assists devotees in the end-of-life activities such as formulating their final wishes, helping people and their families transition and accept the last stage of life, preparing devotees' bodies for the final journey, and even bringing their remains to their final resting place in the Holy Dham. She currently serves in social media and co-facilitates online grief support groups for the Vaishnava CARE with Janaki. She is a meditation instructor and is pursuing a career in interfaith chaplaincy. Welcome.
Hare Krishna, thank you for having me.
You both have impressive resumes, so let's get started. Kamala Radha, tell us what grief is. Does it differ from mourning and bereavement?
Sure. So yes, it does. Grief is a natural response or reaction to a loss. Grief is the conflicting feeling, all the emotions caused by the end of something or the change of something familiar. Many people kind of use the terms grief, mourning, and bereavement interchangeable, but bereavement is the time period in which grief and mourning take place. Mourning is the process which people take time to adapt to their loss. Grief is the process of the loss and all the emotions and physical responses that come with it. And food for thought is that some people believe that grief doesn't start until the mourning ends. But I think most of us that work in death work kind of don't like to think of things in a linear or timeline.
So let me see if I understand this clearly. Grief is an emotional reaction, like sadness or crying to a great loss. Mourning is how one exhibits those feelings of grief. For example, rituals at the end of life. And bereavement is the time when a person experiences sadness after losing a loved one, and grief and mourning happen during that time. Do I have it?
Yeah, that's a good understanding of it. It does, even when you say it, it does sound like it's a little interchangeable because things kind of overlap at times. And sometimes people will even say like, oh, I'm grieving. And it's like, well, actually, you're still very actively mourning, and that's okay. But I think one of the things that we would like to talk about today is just to let people know, and I'm sure we will cover it many times, is that any of these stages, any of these things that you are feeling are very normal, and then they are valid. I think it's also important to know that grieving is not always just emotional. It is physical pain too, or discomfort. I think anyone that has experienced depression or anxiety can understand that it's a physical reaction as well.
Thank you. Janaki, is grief experienced only in response to death?
Well, as she was explaining, it's like it's a response to a loss. And so it's a loss of something that's not, that's irretrievable. It's something that you can't get back. So it can manifest, it's not just a loss of a person. It can be a loss of relationships. It can be your reputation, your health, so many different aspects of our lives. And especially with the COVID pandemic, it's just the loss of what we thought our lives would look like can be also something that we grieve, that things have changed in a way that we can't capture them back. So there are many, many aspects, but it's basically is defined by something that you can't retrieve, that it's irretrievable to get back into your life again.
So it
And
could
if I
include
can-
things like death of a, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to kind of just go back a little bit to talk about what Janaki is talking about, is that that one of my teachers, Henry Fursko Weiss, actually refers to the grief as a nice analogy of being on a roller coaster at night and just not knowing what is going to come up and when. And it is hard for a person feeling all of these emotions to prepare for that type of ride. And it could also be hard for them even before a loss occurs. You might be finding it hard to focus at work or summon the ability to clean your house or balance your checkbook. And I just think I want to specifically bring that up today because I feel like a lot of people watching this or listening to this today will be feeling similar in this way. Because just like Janaki was saying, whether you've experienced death or not, even the state of our country and the state of our world right now may make you feel like you're grieving.
Yes, so it could include even spiritual distress, perhaps, and death of a child or loss of independence with aging. Can that be
any of those things?
Cause?
Yeah, anything that is, yeah, anything that we can't recapture we can have a grief response to.
Even animals, right?
Yes, there's a whole specialty about pet loss, and people have a lot of attachment for their pets, so they can go through the whole grieving process around the loss of a pet.
There's such varied situations that can produce grief. Even something as simple as moving into another house can cause that, yeah. So the next question is addressed to both of you, Janaki and Kamala Radha. What could grief look like in different people? In other words, does everyone grieve in the same way?
The answer is no, that everybody has different response. There's different, we know that there's different stages of grief that people can go through, but it doesn't mean that it looks the same, even the different stages. Whether it's always very personal and very unique. Children grieve differently than adults grieve. From adults to one adult to another, it looks different. They're different stages of grief, but it doesn't always express itself in the same pattern. So some people, if they're experiencing denial, it may just be just being shocked and numb, and how that manifests in one person can look different than another. Somebody else may, if they're experiencing anger, they may exhibit their anger in different ways. So they're within the different stages. there are still different ways that people show up and experience that. Kamala Radha, do you want to add something?
I mean, I see, yes, no two people grieve in the same way. And I know that we briefly talked on children, and children definitely grieve differently than an adult, especially all emotions are new to a child. So if you think about a person that's grieving, already their emotions are on the surface and changing from night and day. And a child who's still developing those feelings are going to feel them very intensely. Some people think that children don't grieve at all if they don't have a full concept of death and loss, but it's not too true. You know, children definitely grieve. I can tell you from living in close proximity to 2 children under 5 right now, the grief that one of the children feels just from missing her friends and missing school. I mean, we're talking on a maybe daily, every 2-day basis, just a fit of I'm so distraught. And one of the ways that we deal with it is that we just explain, I understand what you're going through. And we try to assure them that this is temporary and it won't be like this forever. And then we also try to explain that I feel that way too. You know, when she says, I just miss my friends so much, I miss school so much, we say, I miss my friends too. Because you want them to understand that these feelings are not unique to them, that they are not the only ones going through it, that you need to just kind of let people and children know that this is valid and that it's a normal feeling.
And they don't express it the same way, right? Or they won't talk about it like adults do they?
Well, it depends. Some children kind of grieve in spurts, they say. Specialists will say children grieve in spurts. People will tend to adults will tend to sit and try to understand it. And even that, it's like there's no understanding it. You just have to kind of let it be. Children will let it happen, but then have to immediately move on to something else. There was a woman recently that was talking about, she lost her husband to COVID and they have a 5-year-old. And that every morning the routine was the child would jump into the bed and mom would give little kisses and dad gave a big smooch. And so the first morning, the child jumped in the bed and mom did the little kisses. And then he said, okay, kiss like daddy did. And so she did a big smooch and he just went, it's just not the same, mom. And they both cried. But then the child immediately jumped out and wanted waffles, where the mother still needs to stay in bed and sit with what she's feeling. So children, I think most of the time people think it's in spurts. I would say that also let them feel whatever they are feeling and let them express their grief. I would say that if your child is not showing any signs of grief, and Janaki, I will probably defer to you, is that that might be when you want to have someone speak to the child if they're not, because they can tend to internalize a lot. And if they're developmentally going through stuff, you want to make sure that they're on the right track. Does that sound something similar, Janaki?
Yeah, it's like they are, depending on the developmental stage, they're going to have different needs to be met. And even though they might not be expressing it outwardly, they probably are still experiencing it in some way. So just making sure that they have some ways and they have the freedom to talk about it, but also not to push it on them, not to force them to speak about it if they're not ready to speak about it. It's like play therapy and art therapy are great avenues for letting children to show their grief and release some of it and move on with it. We did we did a memorial service at the temple in Hillsborough a couple of years in a row where we just did a lighting of a candle. We'll speak a little bit about different services. And one thing that I really noted one year, so what we did is we just named the person. Everybody had a candle. Everybody named the person they wanted to mourn. Then we lit the next person's candle and as they lit it, they said the name they wanted. And we went around and many, many children joined in and they named their grandparents and different people in their lives. And it was really powerful. So they became a part of the whole thing together. but they also got to share in a way that they, in community, which was really helpful for them.
Nice. Are there any books that would be helpful for children who are grieving or have suffered a loss?
I mean, there are a lot of books about grieving for children. I would just tell people if they're interested in that they should take a look. I think Scholastic themselves make a really good list. I think it's an interesting topic to bring up because, childhood is 0 to 18. So you're talking about a lot of scope. Like, are we talking about a grief book that's like a board book for a child, or are you talking for something more for like a teen? There are a lot of books out there right now, and they're all very beneficial. I don't know if Sangeeta is in our group right now, but I know it's a dream of hers that she could write a devotee Vaishnava children's book on grieving, and I really hope she does.
Yeah, that would be really, really useful.
Yeah.
Thank you. So Janaki, are there certain stages a person goes through when they're grieving?
There's been some stages that have been denied, and again, it's not linear. It's like people can loop around in those stages, but the ones that we know a lot about are denial, anger, bargaining, kind of depression, acceptance. And one that that's being explored a lot more now is called finding meaning. So like, what is this, now that I've had this life, what does that mean? How do I move forward in life as I go from this? So in denial is what it sounds like. You're just in shock. You're not believing that it's happening yet. Anger can look different ways. It can be anger towards self, anger towards others, anger towards God, anger towards life in general, even the person that's passed away. I know my mother experienced that when my father passed away, that she was angry at him that he did so, because he was there. He was only 56, and it was a great loss for her. But it's all considered normal. The bargaining piece, if I'd only done this, but if that had happened, instead. So, and eventually one begins to accept it and to move into finding some meaning in their life as they continue on the journey. As they continue to move forward with it.
And how can depression show up? What kind of signs, symptoms would you have?
Well, things that we typically associate with depression, which is there might be some isolation, some loneliness, more crying, sleep issues, poor appetite. Those kinds of things can show up for some. So as we were talking earlier, it's not just the emotions, but it's the physical symptoms. So people may have different things showing up in their body as well as the emotions. And so, the more we tend to not process it, the more it tends to show up in the physical manifestation. So it's really important to move into our grief and not try to skirt around it. So there's a word called spiritual bypassing. So not thinking I've got this ticket, I have all the answers, so therefore I don't have to go through this process. And what can happen then over time is, because you have all this unprocessed grief, because you've thought that you were beyond having to process it, then it can accumulate over time. And then at some point it can become overwhelming. So it's really important to just go with it, step in towards it, and understand what the emotions are, be curious about it, and just be open to what it is. And as well as not judging others, not judging ourselves for where we're at and where we think we should be at, because we are, we're devotees, and we know they're not the body and all this. So not beating ourselves up with the philosophy or others with the philosophy.
Yeah, that can be a really important point for the devotees, and even to just admit that they're going through grief, because it's not the thing to do.
Yeah, it's a very important thing that we discuss that openly and in a loving manner. It's part of our loving exchanges, right? Is that we reveal our heart to each other. But when we talk about detachment and attachment in Krishna consciousness, we're not talking about, as your husband dies, you just say, well, he's not the body, Mataji. This is your loved one. These are the relationships that we have. And we have that is what, we discuss about when people use the term spiritual bypassing, like, oh, he wasn't the body anyway. This is not helpful. What we know the philosophy, but we are still very attached. We are still very much in this material world and in these material bodies. And the detachment, I think that is discussed in Bhagavad Gita is more about the detachment of holding on to, things, but, it doesn't actually talk about our relationships. We're supposed to be loving, caring, compassionate people.
Very true. And then when acceptance comes, what does that look like in people? What are they, Janaki, or can you tell us what acceptance would look like?
It's, acceptance is comes when we've processed it, not, it's like, it looks different than shoving it down. Acceptance is we've accepted that this is now our new reality, and how do I move forward and re-engage kind of in ways I might not have done before. It's one description that I make, to me makes a lot of sense is, so like if we say like this is us and this is our grief, and then when we have grief, it's somewhere in there and it may take up part of it, but what happens is it's not that shrinks, it's that we grow. And so acceptance is the growing process, that we are now, it's still there, it will never leave us, it's always going to be a part of us and in our heart. But we as sentient beings have now absorbed that and made it a part of our life, and it still is there, but we are also growing and expanding and changing. And acceptance is part of that, moving more on and expanding our life to include the grief as a part of our experience.
Yeah,
that's a really important point.
Yeah, I think that also, some people as a meditation instructor have come to me, whether it comes from, anxiety or grief, depression, is that usually when people come even to, let's say, to a grief counselor, they may say something like, I'm just trying to get rid of this. What can you give me that can help me get rid of this? And that's when we have to have the difficult conversation of like, I can't take this away from you. What I can do is I can help you learn to sit with it. And I promise you, it won't always sting as bad as it does now.
Yeah, I really like that, what you said about you grow bigger. It's not that the grief goes away. So then you mentioned David Kessler, Finding Meaning. Can you talk a little bit about that? Expand on that?
Kamala Radha, do you want to?
Sure. Okay. Well, you know what? I was just talking to Sangeeta yesterday because we did a nice seminar for the ISKCON Vaishnavas for Latin America. And so I'll use myself as an example of finding meaning. For some of you that may not know me, I am a mother and was a mother. And I had a daughter who was special needs. And she passed away due to her condition when she was 11 months old. And she was oxygen dependent, feeding tube dependent. She was fairly disabled. And it was a very confusing time for me and my ex-husband, because you feel relief that she's no longer suffering, but you're also sad that she is not here. And the grief was very complicated. And it's what really made me start to answer the big questions. Why am I here? Why do bad things happen to good people? And it took me many years of soul searching to figure out why and how. And I thank her every day, because of her, I became a devotee. And I found the devotees and I found Krishna consciousness. And for me, it was the first time in my life that I felt like I had answers that were helpful to me. And I devoted my life to helping others. And I used to say, I'm glad that this helped me, but how can I dovetail this into my service? How can I take my grief and my pain and my loss and help others? And then I met Sangeeta and I took her Vaishnava CARE training. And I was like, this is what I'm meant to do. This is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to help devotees heal from this process. And I've devoted myself to helping as many people as I can. And so I would say this is a good example, or an example, of finding meaning through loss. I mean, there are definitely others. Another one that Sangeeta always uses is Mothers Against Drunk Driving.
Mhm.
If any of you that went to school in America are familiar, you know, this was started by a mother who lost her child to a drunk driving accident. I believe it's like, I think it was like prom weekend or homecoming or something like that. And then she started this foundation that every year, you know, when every school has a prom or a big dance, they come and do seminars, and they show them the dangers of these things. And I remember my high school for prom, they actually had a broken car that they put right on the front lawn as like a reminder of how precious this life is. This is another good example of taking your grief and death and finding meaning through it.
Really nice examples. And thank you, Kamala Radha, for sharing your personal story. And we can see that you have really grown, and we are benefiting from your growth. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing.
So this was really informative. It's good to know that one can go back and forth between the stages of grief, and not everyone necessarily goes through all those stages either. And so grief certainly seems to have many, many different faces. I was wondering if you could, in a practical way, both of you, Janaki and Kamala Radha, can you help us understand in a practical way what are some appropriate and inappropriate things to say or do with somebody who's going through the grief?
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to let Janaki lead, but we love talking about what to do and what not to do.
So the main thing is not being judgmental about where somebody's at, and allowing them to experience what they need to experience. And, you know, it's like sometimes they may be angry, and they may even be angry at Krishna, and it doesn't make it that that's wrong. It's helping them to be able to let that out and let that process happen. Our scriptures give us great comfort. That's why we read them all the time and we take care of them, but not to utilize them as a weapon, not to beat someone over the head with a particular point. It can be very in just in general, whether devotees or non-devotees, the platitudes, you know, they're in a better place now, they're this or that, is not always the most helpful thing. But just to honor, you know, their spirit, and just be present, just sit with it and be curious about what their experience is. By doing that, we allow them to go through the phases of it. We allow them to do that, just to be able to sit with it and be still. And you know, you're kind of like, it's like you're walking alongside with them. You're not trying to lead them anywhere. You're not trying, because sometimes if somebody's experiencing emotion that makes us feel uncomfortable, we say things to try to get them to move away from it, and that's not helpful for them. So just letting them be there with it, letting them have the opportunity to express it and go into it. So there's a quote that I like. It's called "Going to the wilderness of the soul with another human being, not thinking that you are responsible for finding the way out." So you're just going and you're present, and you're not there to force it to go in any way. You're just there to honor what that is. And it can just look like just being quiet and silent with somebody and sitting with them.
Would you like to add anything, Kamala Radha?
Yeah, I think that, yeah, it's excellent. I think especially when somebody's going through something, some acute grief, where it's very, very soon after the passing or loss of something or someone, that you actively listen. It's something that we all talk about, but you're not really there to offer advice at this point. You're really holding space. And so all you really need to do is just be present for someone. There was a woman in our community that experienced a great loss, and so many people were there to help her, and that was wonderful. But a few months after, when she talked to me, she said, you know, the one person that I found most beneficial was another woman from our Sangha, who would just come over to her house, and she would just sit on the couch with her and hold her while she cried. She didn't clean her house or watch her children or bring her food. Maybe she did all those things too, but she said the most beneficial was she was just allowed to be with whatever she was feeling. And she never said it's going to be okay or calm down or anything. She just was present for her. And I think that's a very important thing for people. I know I've experienced as the griever, people saying things that they find to be helpful, but I didn't really need to hear it. I really just needed people to be there for me. And I think that's a really beneficial thing that people should know. Definitely actively listening and holding space is the most beneficial thing that you could do. Just be a good friend.
Give me some examples of what active listening would be.
I honestly, active listening is just hearing you. There's another exercise that's called reflective listening, which is similar. That would be something like, I'm really in a lot of pain. I'm just really having a hard time getting out of this fog. And that's when you would say, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're really feeling it today. But you don't want to kind of rely on that too much, because it starts to sound a little scripted. If I'm hearing you correctly, I mean, you could use it once or twice, but I think just saying things like, that must be so hard for you, I'm really sorry. I think that sometimes people say things and they don't even realize it. Like they might say things like, oh, I understand, or I understand. And to a griever, you might be like, no, you don't understand what I'm feeling. So I would say, don't say I understand, but just say, yes, I hear you. I think I hear you is really good, because that makes people feel like, okay, I am being heard. Janaki, do you have the other examples, you think?
Well, yeah, what I was coming up when you said that was like that point of like, don't saying like, I know what you must be feeling like. I lost my whatever. And it takes away from them, because we all, even my siblings and I, when my mother passed away, we all experienced it very differently. Right? It was the same loss, the same person, but we all had a different relationship. And so not telling someone that I get what you're feeling, I know exactly what you're feeling, because you don't, and it minimizes what that person is experiencing. So part of being an active listener means that you're just open to hear what it is that they're going through, and you're not putting your own story onto them. You're allowing them to have their own experience, their own journey, their own story, and how they go through it. And then they'll get something out, it will help them to be able to process it and move along.
Thank you. That's really very helpful, because the tendency is to say, oh yeah, I also went through this and I know exactly how you feel. So blah, 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 do this,
Yeah.
And
I mean,
Yeah.
even if you think about your, the community right now in Florida has experienced so many losses as of right now. And if you would think of somebody like, the loss of His Holiness Bhakti True Maharaj, that, God siblings may be trying to hold space for each other, but, I would say to stay away from things like, oh, I know what you're feeling, because I feel it too, because no two people grieve the same way. I just think loving each other is the key there, and to just support and help each other.
good point. Loving each other, giving a lot of love, not saying you'll grow from this or everything will be okay, right?
Yeah, letting them tell their stories, letting them process it, letting them speak about it is what's helpful. Is letting, even if you've heard the story already and you might have heard it 10 times, it's okay. Be present for it. That, let them experience it and talk about it.
Well, that really tells me that things that I say, which I think are very helpful, because they're coming out of the goodness of my heart, may in fact be very unhelpful and do some more damage. So I understand we have to be very attentive to what we say to others.
Yeah, it's coming from a good place. You only want to offer help to people, but there's rarely something that somebody could say that is going to bring them out of it. It's really just something that they're going to have to process and go through. And yeah, sometimes holding back and I do it myself. Sometimes I have to hold back, and I just have to keep telling myself, like a mantra, like, I hear you. I'm so sorry. I'm here for you.
Very good. Janaki and Kamala Radha, the next questions for both of you. What are some healing activities that people who've experienced loss either through death or any other reason do for themselves? What can they do?
Well, we mentioned one earlier is one of the things that they recommend for dealing with grief is not to do it alone. And so right now with COVID, it really is forcing a lot of aloneness on it. So it's difficult to for people to be processing so many, like, you know, I've known people like their funerals for their grandparents was one sibling was there taking a picture of it while they were 500 miles away. And instead of coming together and being with people and sharing that experience with each other. So we have these rituals already kind of built into how we do things. We have memorial service for devotees, and there's different ceremonies that are done, and all these are really, really helpful. But it looks different for different people. You know, sometimes you know, it can be like you have a little altar that you do. You light a candle maybe on a daily basis, or different things. Having memorial gardens. This is one of the things that we can do as communities. Is like plant a tree. You put a bench there, and it's a place for others to come and be able to acknowledge and hold space for that. So those are a few things that are helpful. There are many, many different types of things that can be. We've had people build little boats and put them in water and let them go down the stream. And so we can be creative with doing that. But Kamala Radha, you have some other thoughts?
I know that Janaki and I love talking about ritual aspect and legacy work, and definitely for the Alachua community, if there could be some sort of memorial garden at some point, this would be so important for your community. Just one fruit-bearing tree and a couple benches. You could have people sponsor them and put plaques on them, or stepping stones that you could just have some place where people can go and remember these souls and honor them. I think it would be really helpful for your community. There's so many different things that people can do to not lose that loved one and not lose that memory. Through Vaishnava CARE, there's been a couple legacy projects I've worked with and on. There's one woman in one community that lost a great soul, and the family was affected, but also the devotee family was affected. And I tried to help them process it as much as I could. And I gave them the idea, and I actually wrote up like a Google form for them, for everyone to share a memory, whether biological family or association. And I said, why don't you just send this out to everyone that's grieving for the loss of your mother? And it ended up being so much that they're now building it into a blog and then into a memorial website. And this way, even children or grandchildren that didn't really have that many memories will then have that memory. And I think that that's really important. And one that I really, really loved working on was there was a woman who was a very big cook in her community and was famous for different dishes, and people would talk about, I missed this and I missed that. So what we did is we bought beautiful cardstock and we made recipe cards. And then I gave them the idea. I said, well, why don't you, whether it's going to be her appearance day or birthday or the day that she left, you make that a memorial, and you can make these beautiful recipes, and so that you can honor her and her memory in a beautiful and loving way. So sometimes it just takes like a little tweak of an idea. And I promise you, it won't always sting. It won't always hurt. You can make it a beautiful memory.
Thank you. Are there any suggestions for support groups, or do you offer that kind of service?
Oh, sure. Right now, Janaki and myself run the online grief support for Vaishnava CARE. It is on Facebook because we found that to be the biggest network for people. I like to always remind people that it is private and confidential. Sometimes devotees get scared because they think, oh, it's on Facebook, everyone's going to know. But every person in there has to fill out a little form, and they check that it's a confidential, space where you're allowed to talk about your feelings. You can find it on vaishnavacare.org. You can find it on our Facebook, but I can also link the Vaishnava Care support group in here as well so that everyone can
That'd be great.
have that. The vaishnavacare.org website also has tons of resources, tons of articles. I would also like to add that, as we talk about grieving, it's also important for us to think about our own life and what we would want. So there are great resources for that. There's information on advanced directives and living wills and things like that. I know even as devotees, sometimes, because we know we're not the body, but we sometimes put these things off. But it's a very important conversation to have, and anyone could go at any point. And so it's good to plan a little bit. So I'm going to put the links here for everyone.
Yes, please do that for both Vaishnava Care and the support group. Now, the support group that's online, Facebook, is it with a group of individuals or is it one-on-one?
Right now, the support group is available just as a group setting with different topics that come up every week. I apologize, there's a train going by.
It's all right.
The material world, what can you do? So right now, the online support group is, we have a topic discussion and people discuss it, how they're feeling. I usually give a prompt at least once or twice a week and ask people to discuss, like just this week we were discussing seasonal grief, seasonal depression, and the changing of the seasons. And does it affect your grief? Does it not affect your grief? And things like this. But me and Janaki have also talked about that if people would be interested in it, we might want to do a support group in a Zoom format like this. We've offered it a couple times, but not that many people have expressed interest in that. They kind of like the open forum, but whatever the community needs, we are willing to work with them.
Well, thank you. Janaki, when would somebody need to see a therapist? What?
That's there's a couple of things to think about. Like sometimes they might be having a trauma response, like if the person died in a pretty horrific way, and so they might be having dreams all the time about how they left this world. And it's not just grief, but they're really distressed about the process with it, and it gets too becomes more complicated for them. So that would be a time when they would need to seek a therapist to get more individualized help. Typically it's not unusual for it to the grieving process to be a year or more, because it's because that circles back around. So it's you're not really if somebody can't, function in the world, then they might need more help in that. If they just can't get through the normal activities, they're not eating, they're not taking care of themselves, that would also indicate that is. But if somebody's a year later is still speaking in distress, that's not unusual. That's kind of within the normal range of things. And things that always, and holidays are going to bring up things, different and times of the year. It's normal for it to kind of get up to the surface again when those different times are there. And those are something that, it's good to plan ahead. Like, how am I going to make it through this holiday season? And when this was this, like she was saying, the person who cooked all the time, these particular festivals, that was the festival they always cooked for. So that's going to bring up more for others to experience it. And that's still within the normal range of things.
Here comes, what's his name?
Oops.
Here comes Nani.
Oops. So it's, it's, if you feel like someone's really, really struggling and they seem to be having difficulty, especially with just meeting day-to-day tasks and things like that, it can, be something to just check into and have them do it. But there's a pretty broad range of what's considered normal.
Well, thank you. Those are excellent suggestions and very useful for everybody. I think people forget to give themselves time to process the loss, and don't really, they isolate themselves. And I really love this idea of the online support group, especially in the pandemic time where it's hard to get together. So thank you. Before we take questions from the audience, I'm sure everyone's wondering what a death doula is, Kamala Radha.
I love it. I have to say, I did this training. I did Vaishnava CARE training with Sangeeta, and I had assisted some devotees, not as they were leaving, but before and then after. But I have been present with a few people as they are actively dying and leave their body. And I had been interested in studying to be a hospital chaplain. And I thought, I'll do this death doula training just as like some background. And I ended up falling in love with this service so much that I was like, maybe I want to stay here for a while. And so anyway, so if people are familiar with a birth doula, most people know a doula is a birthing assistant that helps people come into this world. Well, I'm helping you on the other end. I'm the one that helps you leave. And a lot of it is similar when it comes to the actively dying part. Like sometimes, just like you're assisting someone giving birth, you could be physically assisting somebody as they're getting ready to leave. You could be holding them and rocking them and as they're getting into their, fetal position as well. It's a really beautiful thing. And also, a lot of what I do is advanced directives, so I can help people put their living wills together, figure out how much they want to do and what they don't want to do, also with their wills of who gets what. And as the death doula, part of what it is I'm the advocate. So like if the family's coming in and they start wanting to divide things up, I'm also the one that's like, right now we're holding space for this. All of this can be discussed after, we have plans, but also there's just beautiful ways of helping people come to a happy place in their death, helping them settle unfinished business, figuring out who gets what. Like there's a beautiful story from my training that there was a person who collected sea glass. They loved sea glass. So one of the things that they wanted to do is they strung them all and they hung them in the window, and every person that came to visit them, they'd tell them pick one as a memory. So, I try to work as much in death positivity as I possibly can. If you think of life as the seesaw, one end is birth and one end is death. And we tend, even as devotees, to always focus on the happiness, on the birth. And we don't really want to talk about the death. And some people call what I do end of life doula, but as devotees, we know this isn't the end. So I like to say death doula because it's specifically about death. But there's also a school in Western Europe that likes to use the term soul midwife. I really like that term too.
I had no idea that there was formal training in this, and that's a very interesting and much needed service. Thank you very much.
And I just want to add real quick before you go to questions, like Manduria Leela, I'm looking at your face and Janaki, and this is one of the things I always like. It's like everybody here is like happy and like we're jovial and we're talking about these heavy subjects. And that's what death positivity movement is about, is normalizing these kind of conversations. And I think it's really important that we understand that it doesn't have to be sad. It can be, and you're allowed to have your emotions, but to not be afraid of it. And it's okay to have these conversations.
Very true. Very true. Thank you. So now we'll have some questions from the audience. Do we?
Okay. Do you want me to?
Who has a question?
There are some questions in the Facebook, from the Facebook as well as YouTube.
Okay.
Okay. Would you like to read them then?
Vaishnavi Prabhu, your volume is a little bit low for me.
Let's see. Can you hear me better now? Okay. All right. So I'll just ask this question, which is a general question first, and then go on to, there is more than one. Varuna Das is asking, I would like to know, is there a significant difference between how men and women grieve? It's for me, it's like it sense that we are mainly talking about the ladies grieving. I could be wrong. So
Janaki, I think that you're good at talking about this specific topic.
Men grieve and women grieve. It just like that may be one of the things that looks a little different in how they grieve, but we all grieve, not just women. The men are grieving as well, and the process is there. And the more we allow them to have the space to express it, the more we can understand that and see it. And typically, we typically think of women as people who are the ones that express emotions. It doesn't mean that it's not existing within, that a man can't feel these things, and he goes through they go through the same stages of grief as well, denial and acceptance and all them there. It just may sometimes look a little differently. And sometimes they may feel like they have to hold a certain image, and in which case we want to give them the opportunity to be able to express that even more so.
Janaki, didn't you run like a men's devotee support group?
Mm-hmm. We did that once in Hillsborough. It was they all showed up and they all shared and they all were very, very much invested in it. So I would say that that if you give space, it will the emotions will come up, and people, I think it was really important. It was we had just, one of the members had just lost his brother, who was also a devotee and a member of our community, and so it was really important for them to have the time to process.
I think they're hesitant a lot of times just to come up with their feelings.
And sometimes, that's where it might be helpful to have separate groups for grieving, have a men's group, have a women's group, because we do it a little differently, and the discomfort might be there and sharing and mix, but it's the emotions are all there.
Okay, thank you, Varuna Prabhu. The next question.
okay, so there are a couple of comments. I'll read them. Bhadra Prabhu is saying Arjun was affected when his son Abhimanyu was killed, and he was really upset, but then took up his service to Krishna in battle. So it is important to grieve. So again, another comment by Varuna Das is, a devotee has to be ready at any time to hear grief of others as one meets persons or devotees, other devotees. One may not be able to help much, but the least we can do is feel empathetic and hear the person who is grieving. So those are from YouTube. Amrit Kelly, you want to go? I thought there was a question in chat.
I didn't see a question in the chat. I want to thank you both so much. This has been just wonderful. There was a comment about anticipatory grief and wanting to talk about that a little bit.
Great. Do you want to start, Janaki? Oh, I think you're muted.
You can start, and then I'll.
Okay. So, anticipatory grief, people may even be feeling that right now. It's grief before the loss occurs. I think we briefly talked about it in the beginning of this. So you may have a loved one, as an example, that is gotten a formal diagnosis and is now going on to hospice, which is like basically the last 6 months. And even though they are still present, you may still just be grieving the soon to be loss. So you may still be exhibiting all of these things, even though they're still present, because you know that it's going to happen. And it's very common, and the treatment is still the same, is that you're going to let them feel what they're feeling, because it's completely normal and it is completely valid. once again, to use that roller coaster analogy, you know, a lot of people, when they are grieving, they feel like they're going crazy because their emotions are on the surface and they're changing very quickly, up, down, left, right, sadness, happiness, depression, crying, you know, they're all over the place. And that could be happening even while the person is still here. And so it's just very important to let everyone know, I know you feel like you're going crazy, but this is what it feels like, because it's just a very upsetting situation.
And that grief can be for the individual who has the disease and his family members
Absolutely.
or friends.
Absolutely.
And it can also be, I think, what do you think? Could it be in response to, you know, a loss of job that's maybe coming up, or maybe a relationship that's not going well, you know, things like that?
A divorce, you know, a move, a loss of job because because of COVID. I mean, a loss of a sense of normalcy. You can all be grieving. I mean, we're all grieving collectively, individually and collectively. These are real things.
And even in anticipation, because people are losing their jobs, or so that means financial problems, like that.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Their lives
good.
can be changing at any time. We all have some anticipatory grief for we're all going to face death at some time. So what is that going to be, and what does that look like? Some of us get noticed and some of us don't, but it's all going to
And
happen.
even spiritual life factors into that for somebody who's getting close to death. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's, someone's going through that process. I've heard it described before. It's like it's like the boiling of the ghee, and some of the impurities may be rising to the surface. And those of us that are helping and assisting them, we should not become bewildered by those things rising up to the surface as we are helping them in their journey. It's a kind of a natural thing that as one gets closer and closer, if they have some notice, that different things will come up, and it's just a way of clearing it away and allowing it to move on. It doesn't, not to judge them for having some of these impurities kind of pop up and show up. It's a process, and learning to let go, and that's not our real identity, and just being able to honor that and move on with it.
Well, even the individual who's dying, say, may feel, I wanted to accomplish X, Y, Z in spiritual life, and I'm not there. So how would you react to that? Those are sometimes just the rasa that they have with Krishna. I wanted to do so much more. It's like, it's not a bad thing that I want, this is what I anticipated and wanted so much to be able to do and couldn't accomplish. It's that feeling of separation from a service. It's not a negative. It's it's like your soul's going to go on. You'll have opportunities again to serve your spiritual master, to serve Krishna. Just kind of reframing it for them.
So beautiful. It really is beautiful. That's great, Janaki. It's such a good reminder, because for the person who is getting ready to leave, and if we're talking about the stages, from a devotee perspective, like if we talk about bargaining, what does bargaining look like? Well, oh, Krishna, if I only had so much more time, I wish I could go back. If you give me more time, I'll go to Mangalarti every day, it's true. These things will happen. And you may even experience doubts. And I think this is really important for devotees to understand, because they may feel scared to reveal their heart in that way. I practiced, Krishna consciousness for 40 years. And now that I'm dying, I'm wondering, I'm having doubts, and they may not want to talk about that because they're embarrassed. I think it's very important that you have a loving relationship where you could talk about that with. And especially if you have someone that can tell them your doubt is part of the stages, and that it's a normal reaction, but you deep down know the truth, and you know what is real. And I just think it's, one of those things that you have to explain that normal, valid feeling to them, and let people reveal their heart in a confidential setting. I think that's
Good
very
point.
important too.
Yeah.
We don't want anything to
Good
end up
point.
on Dandavats. If somebody reveals their heart to you as they're getting ready to leave their body,
Yeah.
you take that with you.
Very important point. Any other questions out there?
Looks like Sundari has a question. She has her hand up.
Hey, Haribol, everybody.
Hare Krishna.
Haribol.
I wanted to go back a little bit to the comment about anticipatory grief. That was me who was talking about it. And it was more, I'll share a little bit about our family. It's a little similar to Kamala Radha's story. We have a special needs little girl. She just turned 12 last Sunday, so that's really, she's a very sweet child, and her health is pretty decent for her condition. So we've been living with anticipatory grief for 12 years. And recently, we have support groups on Facebook, and we've lost quite a few children recently. And it's something that has definitely happened pretty regularly since her birth. It's a reality for us. And my question is, how do you live with it for so long? It takes a toll.
Mhm.
And it feels like it's easy to become a bitter person, to feel isolated, to not know how to take care of yourself anymore, or your spouse. Your relationships deteriorate quicker. It's very difficult. So I guess my question is, what do you do when it's long term, when it's years, and could be many, many years of your life? It could be, my daughter absolutely can outlive us, and that's a grief in itself, worrying about her and what will happen after we are gone. So if you could speak a little bit towards that.
Sundari, I just want to hug you so bad.
I'm so emotional. Like, I cannot get through saying anything with even a little drop of emotion without like crying.
Yeah. And let me be the first to tell you, it's a completely normal feeling. And like we said, like, you can't compare, the two griefs. So there's no two griefs are the same, but I can tell you from a personal experience that when I was in the PICU with my daughter one time, then my mother was with us, that I was looking very numb at that point. And this was after tracheostomy, G-tube, all of these things. And I just said to my mom, like, I know she's here right now, but I'm grieving so bad because it's just this, she'll never walk down the aisle. She'll never graduate college. All these things that I wanted for her that she'll never have. And it's so hard. It's so hard. And I don't know about you personally, Sundari, but one of the things that I experienced is that I'm in a pediatric palliative care support group for parents, and my daughter left early, and so many got to stay. And then I was experiencing complicated grief because I had envy. Why did my daughter have to only be here for 11 months and some people get to be here with the same condition for 10 years, 12 years? But we don't control the timeline, and it's hard. And I think a lot of people now with COVID understand this expression that we use is called new normal, but I was familiar with this term a decade ago, because as a special needs parent, there is no normal. Everything is this new normal, like having, to vent a G-tube, having to have a suction machine, having, pulse ox on at all time to watch your desaturation rates, all of those things. This is the new normal. This is the only normal I have. And you are actively grieving even while this is going on. It's not even, I don't want to even say it's anticipatory. It may be because anticipatory is because she could leave, or when will she leave, or how will she leave, and what if she outlives us? These are all valid and difficult things to process, and it's a hard thing to sit with on a daily basis. And I'm sorry. I just want to say that. And I know you have a great support system, and I'm always there for you too. But I want to lean into Janaki a little bit to talk about it from from a clinical background too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and Kamala Radha for providing some support. I think, this is like versus like in your situation, it's a chronic kind of situation. It's always there. It's not an acute situation. And get support, always reach out. And in this situation, probably getting professional support, it would be really helpful for you to have that. And through the process, doing like ritual is the way we process grief. It allows it to come up. So finding and developing your own rituals that help you as you go through this journey, whatever that looks like, keeping, a journal, or writing letters, or, having an altar, lighting candles, and being able to honor and respect that, because all these souls that you're in this group with, as they leave too, it's touching your heart in many different ways. So finding ways individually to express and show that grief, but also collectively be able to process your grief and allow for us to, it's, like as I was telling you about, how do we grow around the grief, and your grief keeps growing as you're growing, it keeps coming and expanding. So it has more, it takes more energy and attention to the process itself, so that you can continue to move forward and continue to grow and process that grief.
And I just wanted to say, I think it's kind of similar to something we touched on a little earlier too, that sometimes people will come to some sort of support or therapy and be like, well, I want this to go. Like, how do I make this go? Like, how do I deal with this day in, day out? And what it is then we help you develop the tools to give you the strength, because you're in the position right now where you have to endure. So what we then do is like, we become the pillars that help strengthen you, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense.
Sindri, if you want to talk about this, privately, I know you have my number, but I think it's an interesting topic to bring up. But one of the things that I learned with doing family faculty is that very similar what a lot of parents of special needs children have is a form of PTSD. It's not post-traumatic because you're living through the traumatic situation currently.
Yeah.
I can say from my personal situation, right? Like, so much of it was like, oh, there's desaturation, get the ambu bag, get a suction machine. And then, okay, now she's stable. And then you sit down, but you have all that adrenaline. And yeah. I remember going to a museum because I had a caretaker at the time. And halfway through the museum trip with my ex-husband, I said, we have to go home. I can't be here. Like, what if something happens? I'm sure you understand those feelings.
Yeah, it's definitely a big part of it. And I just wanted to agree with Janaki Devi that counseling is a very, very needed tool in many of these situations. And it's something that I feel has helped me greatly, both marital counseling and private, just, for myself. Having somebody there that is there just for you is very powerful, where you can talk about the good, the bad, and the very dark, because sometimes these situations you see sides of yourself, like you said, where it was very complicated for you to grieve because you had relief and all these weird feelings that you don't want to have as a parent towards a child, So yeah, I'm an advocate for that as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for sharing and talking. I love you so much.
Love you too. Bye.
Mahavishnu Priya made a comment, taking care of your health, making sure you take care of your health, your immune system. This is really stressful on our body. So don't forget to support yourself physically as well.
Yeah, you can't give from an empty well. So you have to replenish your sources. And if you're having a hard time finding that, then we can help you find what will help that.
Thank you, Kamala Radha and Sindri, for sharing your stories. It's makes it so much more alive and personal. And I liked what you said earlier, that I think, Janaki, you said that as we develop, as we process the grief, that the the container grows bigger, we grow bigger and are able to handle. It's not that the grief's going to go away, but it will give us more abilities to handle it. And I like the idea that you said that we could write letters to Krishna, reveal our heart and offer them on the altar, and as a way of helping. Thank you very much, Sundari, and revealing your heart, and Kamala Radha. Any other questions or comments out there?
Yes, there is a question. I mean, at least 3 questions from both YouTube and Facebook, but it's past 12 already. It's 12:17. I'm not sure. Should we ask the question? Should I ask the question, or what are we doing here?
That's up to you as the facilitators. I don't want to speak for Janaki, but we would like to help out as many people as we can.
Okay.
Keep
Well,
going.
somebody said something, I didn't hear it. Okay, anyway.
Keep going.
Keep going. Keep going.
Keep going.
Okay. All right. So Vinod Vani writes, please address complicated grief where the person had difficult dealings with others.
Yeah. Janaki, do you want to start?
Yeah, this one probably gets into the realm of probably wanting to have a therapist. When it's like really complicated, your relationship with them is difficult and it's challenging and it's not so easy to let go. There are reasons, things left unsaid, and things get, and if they're not processed, then it becomes really, really hard. And so that might be a good time to get a professional to work through all that, because sometimes it's not so straightforward. It's not so simple. Sometimes there are other factors, things that you wished you'd said or things you wished you hadn't said, or opportunities in the relationship that needed healing that it didn't happen. And so the rituals will help with that, but sometimes if it's too difficult, then it's really helpful then to get to have a professional to speak with.
Definitely. And I think some of the situations that I've seen is, let's say a complicated grief could come from a complicated relationship with an abuser. This is a situation where, and people may get confused, like, why am I grieving for my abuser? This person hurt me. Why? And it's because you're grieving because you won't have that closure now. Maybe in the back of your mind, you always hoped that you could have some sort of closure, and now it can't happen, and then it gets complicated. And definitely professional help is needed. And some of the rituals that have been recommended for that is letter writing. If someone has left that you have unfinished business with, write to them and tell them what they did to you and how it made you feel and how it affected you. I think it's very beneficial.
Thank you. Thank you, Vinod Vani, for asking that question. Vinod Vani is also a licensed clinical social worker.
Yay!
Okay, the next question then, who's that from?
You're muted.
Mahendrani is asking a question. Probably you were speaking about bargaining. I'm not sure. So anyway, her question is, what does bargaining look like?
Yeah, I think we talked about it a little bit before. I think I specifically was talking about devotee bargaining, but in general, bargaining stage would be like, if I could just have a little bit more time, I would do X, Y, and Z. I'd give this much to charity. I'd go to Mangalarti every day, and things like that. Janaki, do you have more talk on bargaining?
Yeah, it's bargaining means like trying to make a deal. So you're trying to do a workaround on something. So yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Mahendrani. Anybody else there?
Yeah, one more. Arun Malik in YouTube is writing, what are your recommendations or suggestions to reduce the emotional effect of sorrows or grief?
Sorrows of someone leaving?
Sorrows/grief.
Grief, okay. How about you, Janaki?
I'm not sure I understand the question. They said, what are the techniques to erase it?
To reduce the emotional effect of sorrows. What are the solutions?
Moving into them.
Yeah.
Going towards them, not away from them. And, moving towards will help reduce it. It's like if we, if we're afraid and there's lots of reasons not going into emotions, like there's lots of things, but that keeps us stuck. But if we move into it with curiosity and just respect whatever comes up and just honor whatever information is coming for us, then it's easier to let it go. It's the trying to stuff it down that creates it to stay a situation where it stays longer, where it becomes more difficult. So moving into it means that I will, I'm not going to run away from this emotion. I'm just going to step into it and then release it more, mourning and doing the rituals will help reduce it, will help it to go away because it's processing it. It's allowing it to come up.
What kind of rituals would help with this kind of grief, this kind of emotion?
Well, it's interesting, when, like, if you think of rituals and like if you go on Pinterest and you look at like self-care rituals, as devotees, we practice a lot of them already, like they'll say things like, meditate, chant, and so this is very similar to what we've been kind of talking about is devotees like, yeah, but I do that, but how do I get rid of it? And it's like, that's the point, that you really have to sit with it and you really have to honor it and not try to push it away or get rid of it. You just have to let it, like a wave, like if you're in the ocean and you're going to get smacked by a wave, you kind of just got to let it go over you. You won't always feel the pangs of it, but you have to let it exist as well. So a lot of the rituals, I'm sure that Janaki will talk about it. It is similar,
Yeah, same. It's letter writing, candle lighting,
prayers to Prabhupada, prayers to your deities, prayers to Krishna.
Just
talking to others.
And well, one realization that I had when I was dealing with some significant sorrow and loss was I was a new devotee and it was just I felt of it as a weight. It was getting heavier and heavier, and we happened to have Krishna Balaram deities, and I was like, well, Balaram's the strongest, right? And he's the incarnation of beauty, and also he's so strong. So it's like we tend to think of just giving positive things to the Lord, but also just giving, I can't carry this anymore. It's too heavy for me, and offered it as like an offering to Balaram, and then immediately I felt a shift and a change that it's like it was just weighing me down, and I didn't know how else to deal with it. So just offered it up to the Lord and letting him be the one to assist.
Janaki, I love it when you talk about that. I love it so much because I really feel like it's like a light bulb moment in my head, because we think about what we offer in our prayers and all these things, and we always think of offering, these nice things, flowers and food, but it's like, but we're nothing without Krishna. And why can't I offer him my heartache? Why can't I offer him my grief? Because I can't handle it on my own. I need him. I need him to help me through it. And I think it's just such a good reminder for people that to give it to God.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent suggestions. Really excellent. Okay, do we have any more?
Yes, Amrit Kaylee has a question and a comment, but before that, can I one more question from Facebook. Haripriya is asking, how do you advise dealing with the loss of a family member during this COVID situation?
This is hard, because it's like with COVID, we're often not allowed to travel. We're not allowed to meet in person. It just really increases the difficulties in processing our grief. Some communities, they've gone on Zoom, and opened up the floor and had different people share and speak and talk, and done a virtual ceremony to be able to do that, with the thought in mind too, when things shift and change, that coming together physically in person as well, to be able to honor and respect that. So you know, both things being there, but there's we've gotten very creative with this technology of being in and don't, and it is very powerful. And just even though we're not physically in the same room, we can share the experience together through some, you know, some sort of venue to be able to do it. There's lots of different platforms, but being able to do that, and as much as possible, whoever you're nearby, to have at least some physical support in that as well.
And we've actually done that on the last couple losses that we had. We had a Zoom, actually it was on Facebook and YouTube too, a Zoom memorial service, and it was very, very helpful, we thought.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
I was thinking we could also do that not only for a specific memorial, but just an event where everybody could share their personal grieving experience.
Yeah.
You know, just, we can all try to be present, like Kamala Radha was saying, and just hearing very attentively and help each other in that way.
Good idea. Good idea.
Yeah, because there's many losses now, and just having that opportunity and a platform for people to share.
Okay, so Rita Kelly, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you both so much. You know, this happens a lot when a topic comes up, and I feel like we have a pretty good general idea of what's going to be talked about, and we feel like we might get some deeper insights, but I feel so brought inside of feelings that I wasn't quite aware of, that I think I have subconsciously, and it's really been tapped into, and I'm just so grateful. Such a practical, important conversation that should continue, just like everyone is saying, in our community. One thing I wanted to comment on was that, as someone who's experienced loss and grief, I realized that I felt qualified to support other people by sharing my experience, and I can see how, you know, that's really sort of a flub. Like you said, everyone experiences it differently, and we need to honor people's individual pain and not try and help them to feel supported because we're also in pain or we've been in pain, unless they ask for it, I think. But if not, you know, I can see that that's been something that I stumbled over recently, actually. The question I had that I wanted to ask was about this. It's about survivor guilt. My sister passed away a year ago after a year and a half with leukemia, and it was a very, very dramatic experience for the family and for her. And you know, now with holidays and visiting family, we were just with family for a couple weeks. And one thing that I feel is that my grief is less, or it's different. It's very different from my stepmother's. And what was really hard for me, which I tried to digest, but I don't think I have a lot of work to do on that, is that me and my family being around my stepmother causes her pain right now, because it's a reminder to her that her daughter is gone. She doesn't have this opportunity anymore. And like, even my son having a tantrum would send her, you know, into a place where we felt uncomfortable being there, and we wanted to honor her feelings, but it was also hard for me emotionally. So I'm just wondering if you could touch on that, on any of that.
Janaki, do you want to go first?
I think, you know, like, part of it is, yeah, we're all different, and we're all going to experience it at different phases, and we're going to bring up different things for different people at different times. And just trying to move away from the discomfort, but being able to just meet her where she's at, or meet other members where they're at. And it's not a judgment on, like, I'm feeling it more now than you are, therefore it's more valid. It's like that judgment needs to just let it go, and allow people to process at different time. My father passed away very shortly after my moving into the temple in St. Louis, but so I was in the ashram and I didn't visit very often, and then I moved away, and I noticed my grief took a lot longer, because I would go home and then it would just be flooded with thoughts of my dad, whereas my siblings were visiting my mom all the time. And so but it didn't mean that they didn't experience as much as I did, or it was just the timeline was a little different because of that. So being around others. And then I still, my aunt whose daughter died in 1979, it's still every time, every Christmas, everything, there's something that she brings up about Patty Ann. It's like, it's and it's in a way, after a time, it's just like, it's beautiful that she can still think of her, and share a memory and do it. So over time, it will look different and shift, but the leaving the judgment on individually and collectively, and you're not at fault for being there, and your son's not at fault for having a tantrum. It's like, he's just being himself, and just finding ways to give support and love in whatever way we can. Kamala Radha, do you want to add something?
Rita, Kaylee, if I can, if you don't mind me asking you some questions, do you feel that the child being there is triggering her, or has she expressed that?
Both.
Okay.
Well, the conversation happened towards the end of the trip, which I was really grateful for, because it seemed to let things out that were inside, and that helped a lot. But it was clear to me before, and then it was confirmed when we spoke.
Well, I'm glad that you spoke about it, because I wanted to know, when I first heard you talk about it, I was wondering if that was something she had expressed, or was that some speculation that you maybe had come to, like that, but regardless, collectively as a family, you're all grieving, and you're all going to be grieving in different ways. And it's not like you or anyone could be like, okay, so I'm not going to bring this child here because it's upsetting it's like everyone's going to have to process it in time. And I felt like you immediately started with the term survivor's guilt. So is that something that you feel like you maybe have a little bit about your sister? Yes. Like that you're here and she's not, if I'm understanding that?
More like related to what you said, my presence being a painful reminder to somebody else that they've lost their daughter that they love.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, is that grief? Is that a form of grief as well?
I would definitely say it's a form of grief. Yeah, I would definitely say that, because grief is many faces. It's all the emotions, like to talk about myself for a minute. One of the things that I personally experienced with having my child was her, and a lot of people maybe that have special needs children, they know there's not just like one diagnosis. There's kind of like a couple different things. And because she never had like a formal syndrome or thing, that one of the problems that happened with my complicated grief is that I blamed myself for her death, because I needed, and it took me a long time to work out, and actually I worked it out with my at-time chaplain, is that I needed something to blame. I needed something to be mad at. And for me, because there was no cause and no diagnosis, I made me the cause. And when I finally started to process that with healthcare professionals, it was like a light switch had been turned on. But I mean, these feelings will come up. You might even have a good day and then feel guilty for feeling, how dare I feel good because my sister's no longer here? How dare I feel happy when she's, there, it sounds like a lot, but it is all grief. And it's just really painful right now. and it may be really painful for others in your family more than others, and there's just no right or wrong way. And it's not like if I'm feeling better and she's not, that I'm doing it wrong. You know, it's going to be different for every single person involved. Janaki, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's an individual process. Everybody's doing it all at different levels, and just holding each other in space of acceptance and love and care, including ourselves.
Thank you. And I think
Yeah.
what this has helped so much, the whole talk, is realizing that, you know, when you say things like sit inside your grief or allow yourself to be in your grief, that sometimes we're not even conscious, like in my case, of trying to bypass it or trying to avoid it. We don't realize that it's there. We're just not sitting inside of it. And so I thank you so much for just helping us to just walk a little bit closer to ourselves.
I thank you for sharing your story with us. It's very important, and thank you for revealing your heart to us.
Yes, thank you, Amrita Kayla. It was very touching, and we appreciate your sharing. And also yours, Kamala Radha and Janaki. Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions in the out there in the virtual world?
There is one more from Facebook, but I am unable to scroll up and read it, so I have to apologize to Donna Menard. I'm sorry.
Oh, that would be important if we could get to it, because she had communicated earlier, actually. Before
I see this comment from Donna Menard. You want me to read it?
Sure.
Yes, please.
So she says, so we lost our daughter, then we lost my husband. I'm lonely. My granddaughter has her family now with her own daughters and their father. I still dream of them both. While he was leaving, he kept chanting, but when he couldn't anymore, I laid beside him and chanting in his ears until he passed. Thank you. So it sounds like she's sharing her experience there.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's a lot to deal with all at one time.
Yeah. The more we have at one time, the more support and more care we need, and the more patience we need with ourselves. Till, you know, these are not easy things, and we can't rush them. Just take your time and reach out, get support.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Donna.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think,
yes.
You know, another teacher of mine, David Kessler, talks a lot about grief, and one of the things that I've heard in one of the classes I've taken with him is this effect of like cluster grief, when you have losses upon losses, and the mind has this tendency to kind of group it together as like, oh, this is loss, this is grief. And since these are both very intimate relationships, they can be honored separately too. And so you can mourn for one and the other. You don't have to lump it together. You're allowed to feel whatever you feel in these losses, and you're allowed to think about one and the other, or vice versa. I just want to kind of just acknowledge that to this person. And I just wanted to say like how strong and how brave you are for, you know, doing that service for your husband too. You know, that you were so concerned about his spiritual well-being that you chanted for him when he was no longer able to. And I mean, that is the best service any devotee could do for anyone leaving their body. And I hope that brings you some comfort in these trying times, that you are doing exemplary service.
Thank you very much, Donna. I hope you have some local support that you can reach out to. And also this online support group through the Vaishnavas CARE that Kamala Radha and Janaki spoke of would be perhaps a place you could connect, and especially in this pandemic time.
Yes.
So is that?
Yeah, it's in the comment section on Facebook, and we will put that in the description in the YouTube just after this.
Okay.
Okay.
The website addresses. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very, very much, Janaki and
Welcome.
Kamala Radha, for being with us today. We
All right.
learned so much from both of you. We really appreciate the work both of you are doing to help others in need, especially at a time in their life when they really, it's very crucial.
Mhm.
We hope you'll return in the near future.
Anytime.
And we ask that Krishna may bless you in your service.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you
very
so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. So
I would like to.
are we offline?
No, she's going to actually play something.
You start. Okay.
Yeah, please start, Neil. Thank you. I would like to thank my team for their support and
Yeah.
dedication, without whom this presentation would not have been possible. Vaishnavi, our tech expert, Amrita Kali, and Namamrita Das. Is there sound there, Vaishnavi? Thank you, ISKCON of Alachua and Mother Mukhya, our president, for your continued support and encouragement. Thank you, Badahari Prabhu, for the use of your bhajan. And most of all, thank you, all of you out there on Facebook and YouTube and Zoom, for taking your valuable time on a Sunday morning to participate in this seminar. Please let us know if we can be of any further assistance. Vanchakalpatribhischa, kripasindhuva evacha, patitabhavanabhyo, shrivanamo. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Haribol.
Haribol. Thank you.
Haribol. Thank you.
Haribol.
Hare Krishna.